Arbitration season. The Marlins front office had a lot of work to do and a lot of negotiations to conclude by yesterday's deadline. 8 of 11 done. However, 3 big names. They could not agree a number for 2024. And right now they're projected to go into an arbitration hearing. Tons to get into. This is Locked On Marlins.
You are Locked On Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings from England and welcome to Locked On Marlins. It's your daily Marlins podcast. I'm your host, of course, Peter Pratt. Hit me up on X at Miami Marlins _UK. If you are listening to the pod, firstly, good morning. Top of the morning to you and happy Friday. Yes, sir. This is your team every day, of course. And thanks for making Locked On Marlins your first listen. This should be a first listen because this one is dropping early doors to get you motivated, potentially, for Friday and the weekend ahead. There is a YouTube channel as well, guys. Make sure you hit subscribe over there. That YouTube channel is well named, and it is called Locked On Marlins. This episode is also sponsored by Gametime. You can download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. And for those watching, they will see, but for those listening, I have a surprise for you. It is Friday. It is a morning episode, and the UK GOAT is back. Shawnee B, how we doing, brother? And Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, Happy New Year. The latest Happy New Year of the year, for sure.
For sure, mate.
It feels like it's been a while, because it has been a while. It's good to be back on, mate. And funnily enough, nice early morning pod, and we've got some breaking-ish news to cover.
It feels breaking, mate. For this off-season, this is definitely classified in the bucket of breaking news, or any news, frankly. But yeah, Happy New Year to you, mate. And I'm sure as we get back into our regular patterns, then the regular rotation will resume. Nevertheless, it's good to talk, and there's plenty to talk about. As you mentioned, yesterday was all about arbitration, and the Marlins had a lot to do. They had 11 guys that are in arbitration right now, and so the front office, clearly the indication we're hearing is the front office are trying to manage the cost base effectively, and so this, to me, I didn't have the expectation they would conclude everyone, and I expected there to be some spillover. Just on that situation, Sean, was that your expectation also? How do your expectations align to that? The 11 guys to get done, a lot to do. They were never going to get it all done, were they?
They were never going to get it all done, no. And I'm quite negative, as you know. So when we got we got the first couple of names through, didn't we? Sort of like early-ish, and it was a case of right now, let's wait for the next one. And then we're waiting and we're waiting and we're waiting. And I started to get a bit worried a couple of hours after the quote deadline. There was no more reporting, and I stayed up quite late last night, as my eyes probably tell you. And even then, there was no breaking news. As it broke about 2 a.m. here that they'd got 9 of the 11 done. So that was, for me, that was a positive, because when I went to bed, they'd got 2 of 11 done. So that was a positive. But yeah, as you mentioned earlier, there are some big names in that list of players that they didn't get done.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think let's start with the trickle effect early, because I was expecting, I don't know about you, but my expectations were on the reporting of this, that there'd be kind of like a domino effect where there'd be like a stream of information where, a bit like what we saw in the early phase of, okay, AJ Puk got something done. Chargois, the next domino, boom, got something done. Jesus Luzardo then actually, I think, was also announced, which I thought was interesting. We're going to talk about Luzardo specifically. But then it was all quiet, to your point. Like none of the other guys were mentioned. Then there was a bit of false reporting around Taylor Rogers and Trevor Rogers and Tyler Rogers, and someone got confused with Rich Rogers and agreed something. I think it turned out to be the Marlins one. But anyway, a busy period for the front office. I think when we probably reflect on this one, they got deals done with the majority of the group, and I think overall, when we look at the projections and the value that they ended up having to commit to those guys, it was under the projection. So for that part of the negotiation, feels like, from a front office perspective anyway, it feels like a win for those where they've maybe shaved 800 grand off the overall pool. So I feel like that's a win. For me, the biggest standout was Luzardo. So let's talk about him, where he was probably around about 500 grand below his projection, maybe at 5.5 mil. Nevertheless, it was more than double his salary from last year. So did Luzardo take a discount here? Was the projection off? Like, when you look at it in the cold light, it has more than doubled. And so I always think of arbitration like you're looking to kind of double year on year if you perform. But because you had that projection number and it came lower, it ended up like mentally feeling like a win. Where's your head at on this one, Luzardo?
I mean, it is a case of like it's early in arbitration, so 5.5 is actually quite a nice number.
No, it is
early on in arbitration. So obviously that's gonna grow exponentially, especially if he performs as we fully expect him to, as that sort of like quasi number one, back end number one kind of guy. So I think in a certain sense, they might have saved a couple of $100 grand here or there on him and a few of the other players, but Luzardo's doing okay, I think. Obviously, arbitration itself is kind of a mockery, isn't it? Luzardo on the, if he were a free agent, he's getting more than 5.5 this year. So
I believe so.
So the Marlins love league minimum in arbitration because they can get talent that they don't deserve at a financial number that benefits them. So this is all good news for the Marlins. If we want to look at it as fans, looking at it as a thing for the team, for our team, it is a case of this is all a positive. So the Marlins obviously they've agreed to a contract number with the players that are willing to, be there or there around their projections. The players that they haven't done deals with, maybe for one reason or another, are looking to get more closer to that figure that represents what they're worth. Yeah,
for sure. One follow-up question in this pool of dudes, more generally, 8 have agreed contracts of the 11. And was there any surprise for you that there's no, maybe like John Birdie type situations at the bare minimum, where they agree a number, but also you bake in almost next year's number, like multi-year elements to this? Like, from what I haven't seen anything to suggest any of these contracts are anything beyond just the year in question. Bit surprised on that, really. It feels like I talked about it on last week's pod, actually, that in some ways this could create an interesting opportunity for the Marlins, where you could maybe get into that situation where Jesus Sanchez, I think, was the example that I used, where he's maybe a little bit nervous about his future in general. Like, he was on the DFA bubble at one point last year, and he had an okay year, a better year than maybe he expected. But still, there's going to be that nervousness with him. I wonder if the Marlins saw him as a piece, and there is that upside in there. Could the Marlins maybe limit their financial exposure here by doing something? So overall, I've kind of led you down Jesus Sanchez, but just more generally, surprised maybe that there weren't any multi-year elements to this, considering the size of the class, maybe.
I'll move on to Sanchez because that's quite an interesting point to me, but I'll quickly just touch on the 3 players that actually have only 2 years of control left. So that's Bethancourt and Jaguar. So both of them are kind of like, would you really want to bake in a second year? Because relievers, especially guys that have never really proven themselves to be elite, can blow hot and cold. Bethancourt, I think it's a case of he's a 1-year wonder for the Marlins, I'd imagine.
Yep.
So Sanchez is interesting to me because he just became a Super 2 arbitration guy. So he's going 4 years of arbitration. And as you said, he's been on the bubble. He's performed well. I think the Marlins could have got ahead of this. If he does, he has an opportunity now to double and double and double his contract. And these guys where they just get to Super 2, but they haven't really shown it through talent. Like, it's just been a case of he's been on the roster. He might get to the point where his arbitration number becomes more than the Marlins are willing to pay for his performance. Obviously, he's youngish, and is still developing and he's getting better. But yeah, he could have been a candidate where the Marlins go, if he does continue to perform and to continue to grow, then that number is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And maybe if we do a deal now, we could not shave a couple of 100,000 off that number. We could shave a couple of million off that number.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where my head was at with Jesus. Was like, I feel like you could get ahead of this one if you believe in him. And I guess, there needs to be time for evaluation. This might just be the wrong time. I think probably when we sit back and we consider why maybe some more strategic elements haven't been made. The fact is, the whole of the front office, Peter Bendix included, are brand new. And so there needs to be a bedding in period for them to maybe get to know these guys personally and, spend some time with them and work out what their actual skills and weaknesses may be. And so it may just be a timing thing, to be honest. But we'll wait and see. I thought it was an interesting one. To your point, though, about Chargois, Bethancourt, like, there's no need for those guys to really be considering like a birdie situation where you're putting a team option. Because I did see, I believe it's Devin Williams was the one that I think I saw popped out around this one for the Brewers, where they've agreed arbitration, also got a club option so I think it was 7 and a bit, and the club option, which is his final arb year, at 10 or something. So the Brewers, because he's a big piece for them, they've fixed their cost there where they know what they're going to be spending if Devin Williams performs, which they probably expect him to perform, into next year as well, which I think is really smart way to do things, and actually would have maybe helped the Marlins too with Arraez last year, to be honest with you. But nevertheless, we'll segue into Arraez actually, and Jazz, Chisholm, and Tanner Scott. All three of those guys we need to talk about because those are the big three, the power three, that haven't been able to land on an agreed contract number for 2024. Before we do that, this episode is brought to you by our good friends over at Gametime, and you should not have to worry about buying tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And they have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. So the other thing, too, it's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat before you buy. You know exactly what you're going to expect when you arrive. That may not be exactly true in Kansas City this weekend. I'm not sure that the Gametime app is going to accurately demonstrate the weather conditions that may be faced for the Dolphins. But nevertheless, all-in prices show your total upfront cost, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out. And you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use this code. And this code is Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code Locked On for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Right, back here with me, Peter Pratt, and the UK GOAT, Sean Barrett, on Friday, the 12th of Jan, and we are up and at it early doors, pre-work. Yes, we have day jobs. This isn't our only job. We have day jobs, and this is that. That's our commitment to you on arbitration, no doubt. We talked about Luis Arraez then just in advance of the ad there, Sean. That's the biggest gap in terms of the numbers that have been exchanged, and it's the biggest gap from what the Marlins have submitted and what the player has submitted. Luis Arraez shooting for $12 million. Big shoot there from Luis Arraez. With that number in play, are you surprised, or how surprised are you that they haven't agreed a number for 24?
I'm surprised simply just because of who he is. Like, it's obviously the biggest Marlin on the list of guys for arbitration. One of the biggest guys in baseball left on the list. Frank Jr. is probably number one in that sense. One of the highest numbers of arbitration as well. And as you said, not quite the biggest gap left, but one of the biggest gaps left. If you go by the projections, the Marlins are closer to that number than Arraez is. So
agreed.
As much as you can trust that projection, obviously it's an independent voice. But they seem to be pretty good at what they do as far as creating a number. As far as it's almost as if baseball take that number and use that to work for them rather than actually that there's any rhyme or reason for it. So normally I'd like to bash the team because that's my want for being cheap and for being running the team poorly. But their offer is pretty close to that number. So I would say that there is some wiggle room, and yes, maybe you go a bit above that number, the projected number, because it is Arraez and because you want to keep them happy. Like going into these meetings and having to sit next to him or across him with lawyers and basically tell him why he's no good. I mean, they could just speak to some Braves fans. They'll get some good ammo from that, I'm sure. But where's the sense in that? Where is the logical sense of saving yourself a couple of hundred? I know it's a lot of money, but a couple of £100,000 to upset your best player. Yeah. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, I mean, it is the way this business is run, though, isn't it?
Do you think in the meantime that they actually reach a different agreement? Before the actual hearing itself, do you think it's possible? Because I just had a sneaky suspicion, but this was pre-Spaces, to be honest with you, where Craig Mish joined the guys, just kind of hopped into the conversation with the guys, and effectively Craig was saying Arraez is very unlikely to be extended by the Marlins, thus will be traded in likely an off-season window, be it this one, but more likely maybe next one. So in advance of that, I was saying, listen, I could see a possibility here where the Marlins and Arraez come together for a longer term extension. Craig is a lot closer to things than me, and that seems to suggest that won't be the case. And so could the relationship here be slightly fractured in some ways between Arraez and the Marlins? I don't know, maybe not, but for Arraez to go quite significantly over the projection, and like you said, the projections are kind of independent. And they're normally pretty close to where things land. Like Arraez is the one overshooting here. And so I don't know. I'm not sure if maybe there's a little bit of a breakdown going on here, maybe a relationship change. But yeah, it's an interesting one. The question is can they get anything done or do they want to? And I think really from what Craig's saying is there's maybe no desire to do anything. And they're just going to happily roll through this arbitration period and probably look to move Arraez next offseason before he reaches his final year, which, man, as Marlins fans, that is a pretty frustrating set of affairs, in my opinion. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, we are nowhere near the pulse as much as Craig is. But I remember last year talking about Arraez and percentages of him being traded, and I was quite high on the idea that he's going to be traded. So has the relationship fractured? I don't think it quite would be that bad, but almost like how interested are the Marlins in making a deal for arbitration and paying a little bit more money to keep him happy if they know he's only here for X amount of days or months.
Yeah.
So they're trying to get the number at a number that they can be happy with, knowing that this might be the last year of him being in the jersey. And to that degree, how happy do they need to keep him? Because he probably knows too. Like his side of doing all these are in these talks as well. He probably knows that he's got one more year in a Marlins jersey, and then he's going to go off to quite literally greener pastures.
Yeah, exactly. Wouldn't it be wild though, just thinking about this out loud, the fact that Arraez was in exactly the same position last year, by the way, and the Twins and Arraez submitted their numbers. In the period before the arbitration hearing specifically, he was traded. Wouldn't it be wild if it was back-to-back years where that happened? I absolutely would not rule this out for the Marlins. I mean, I'm going to talk about this in another episode because I really want to focus on arbitration, but no one's using the word rebuild, but everything that we're hearing, it's a glorified rebuild at this point. And what I mean by that is we're going to sell and trade the guys that are in ARB 2 and beyond, and we're going to restock the farm. That, my friends, is a rebuild. However you want to package it up, that's what's happening, and that is the plan at this point. And God, it would be wild if actually Arraez ended up in the same situation 2 years in a row where couldn't agree with one team, was then traded, it became another team's problem. What are the Marlins going to say? Let's say the Marlins are the one in the room with Arraez and Peter Bendix, who's I don't know, who represents the Marlins in this situation. What are they going to be saying in this session that says he's worth 10.6 rather than 12? Is it just the Braves narrative of he's a glorified singles hitter and he's not worth 12 million? Is that the end of the conversation for Luis Arraez and the Marlins?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree it is. They're going to use some old school numbers because ultimately Arraez is, he's the bastion of the offense on the team. He was surrounded for large portions of the year with, quite frankly, below replacement players. So as good as he was, his runs, his home runs, his RBI, his stolen bases, all those old school numbers that lesser interested fans of stats look at, and ultimately the organization will use as well. They're not great.
No.
So he is a fantastic player, and we all and I could go on for a whole podcast talking about how he's unfairly looked at using those numbers. But that's what the Marlins will use. They will use that. Yes, you can get on base. Yes, you can hit singles all day, but your actual value to winning for us on the field is not as much as another player, which frankly is why you should never go into an arbitration case.
No,
because you can look at the numbers and you can make a good player look bad and you can make a bad player look good. I've done that quite a lot for Garrett Cooper over the years. You can find numbers to say whatever you want to say. There is a billion numbers for every player. You can find some good ones, you can find some bad ones. So the Marlins will use some of those stats to put him down, and there is no way to carry on a relationship with someone you want to perform.
No. Maybe the Marlins don't really care about the relationship, frankly. Like, it's not going to be their problem. It could be the mentality. But I think the point you've called out, though, right at the top regarding Arraez is it's Arraez that's stretching things here. He's the one pushing it beyond the projection. So this feels a little bit different, to be honest with you. Let's say nothing happens. They go into the room, 12 million Arraez or 10.6 million Arraez. Which number do you think they end up landing on?
I think it will land on the Marlins side. I think I don't want to be conspiracy theorist about this, but it tends to go to the ownership side. Say what you want about that.
Yeah, I agree. To be honest with you on this one, I do agree. I think that's the way it's going to go. So let's do the final ad, and then I want to talk about Tanner Scott and Jazz Chisholm Jr., the other two big names that haven't reached an agreement. But before we do that, this episode is brought to you by our good friends, of course, over at FanDuel. Yes, sir. And the NFL's regular season is wrapped up, but it is postseason time, baby. And there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. When you place a $5 bet, that's it. $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. So simple. The app is super easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet. Of course, live, same game parlays, and you can find all the bets you need in the new Explore tab. Plus, my favorite place to operate, it's the Parlay Hub, baby. The best way to find popular parlays and more, of course. So visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, guys, back here with me, Peter Pratt, and the UK GOAT, Sean Barrett. We are running long, it feels, on this episode. I may have dragged it out a touch. Nevertheless, we are talking arbitration. Two guys to talk about. Tanner Scott, let's start there, Sean. He is in his final year of arbitration. And just the whole Tanner Scott situation for me is a really interesting one. Just like there's so many moving parts here. Firstly, are you surprised that they are in this situation where they couldn't agree a number, Tanner Scott and the Marlins, and that they'll go to an arbitrator at this point?
No, not for Scott, simply for one reason, that is it's his final year. And much like Arraez, I don't see him being in a Marlins jersey at the end of the season.
No. I think I agree on that one. I know I agree on that one. The team put forward for Tanner Scott 5.15 million and Tanner Scott 5.7 million. Is Tanner Scott worth 5.7 million?
Is he worth it? Yes. He had an elite year as a reliever. He's going to go into the season as the de facto closer. A, because he's earned it, and B, because that gives him the most trade value going through the season. Interestingly, Scott's number is below the projection or estimate for him. So this really does speak to the Marlins having no interest in getting anywhere near a higher number. I think if Scott had been in the closer role for longer last year, then he would be closer to that number as far as value. But because he only had 12 saves last year, if he was in the role for longer, this would be a completely different conversation, I think. But realistically, I expect him to go into the season. He'll have 25, 30 saves. If he was in the role for the Marlins, obviously, if he is traded at the deadline, he'll probably go in as a setup man somewhere for a playoff team. But yeah, again, is he worth it? Of course he is. If he was a free agent, he'd be getting multi-double-digit million-year contracts from everybody.
Yeah, for sure. I think the interesting thing with Tanner Scott, just to talk about it, is his last year was clearly immense, a career year for sure. The problem the Marlins faces, and maybe Tanner Scott faces too, is the previous years were definitely not like those. And so there's not a level of consistency here at all. And so I understand, and I know what the conversation is going to look like if they end up in the actual hearing itself. They'll just flick onto 2022 and just show just the sheer amount of walks that were issued, the lack of consistency. Maybe from Tanner Scott, there was a clear improvement there. And to your point, Sean, I think this is the really important thing. We've mentioned it with Arraez, traditional counting stats, which maybe at the end of the day, this is a traditional process. This is a historical process in many ways. You use traditional stats, and the reality is, Tanner Scott, he didn't have enough saves. That's the stat you're going to turn to, right? You're going to turn to, okay, Tanner Scott, you want to be paid like a top-level closer. I'm sorry, sir. Your numbers don't suggest that you have you don't have the numbers to back it up. That's what they're going to say.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's what you've called out.
Yeah, and it is a case of they're not just looking at last year. They're looking at a body of worth. This is what you've done in your major league career, in your service time.
Yeah,
that's accrued towards this year. So yeah, you can look at the sub-3 walk rate that he had last year, which is for him with his K rate elite. But if you look at the years past, it's 6+. So it is a case of we're not going to pay you for 1 year of doing what you did.
Yeah.
On the balance of 5 years where you didn't.
Yeah, exactly.
But obviously the Marlins are then counting on him continuing to perform at that high level in 2024.
Yeah.
At a value well below what he's worth. But that's why I don't like arbitration personally. I'm obviously pro-labor. If it's not come across in all our conversations. So yeah, as a fan of the Marlins, obviously this is good for the Marlins. They're getting a very, at least if he performs like last year, a very elite closer, not back end reliever like we've always spoken about, an actual closer for sub $6 million.
Yeah,
that's very good value.
However it comes down, whoever they're sided with, it's going to be a win for the fish. And the reality is, whatever the number is, if indeed Tanner Scott starts the year as he finished last year, it's not going to be off-putting for any of their trade potential situations they may look into. I'd ask whether we could see Tanner Scott being extended, but I don't think we have time. And frankly, I think, Sean's shaking his head. The answer is no. Let's talk about Jase Chisholm Jr. I have one question only with Jazz because we're running long on time. We need to get out of here. Jase Chisholm Jr. and the Marlins, were they ever going to see a same number. Were they ever going to agree on the same number here? And the reason I'm asking this, and I'll just give my sense of it, is I don't think Jazz will ever align to what the Marlins see in terms of value. I think Jazz will always have an over projection, to be honest with you, or a higher projection. Over is the wrong word. A higher projection in terms of value and dollar worth than maybe the Marlins will have. So for me, this was the least surprising situation of all of them, to be honest with you. What about your sense on Jazz?
I get what you mean in the sense of he's going to back himself and he's going to have this confidence. He's going to have this self-worth. That's the way he is, isn't he? Like, do you want me to be a centre fielder? Yes, I'll be the best centre fielder out there. And as it is, he got pretty close after only 1 year. Funnily enough, I'm going to yin when you yang, or the other way around. Beautiful. There's only 275. I know that's a lot of money. $275,000 dollars between the two players, the two sides. Sorry. The deadline is just a line in the sand where teams usually stop. Like, this is a deadline. It's a pinch point where we don't get deal done. We'll just go to arbitration. They can do a deal anytime now, between now and when they walk through that arbitration case door. They could literally give him the contract before they walk in and say, let's get this done. Let's not do this stupid work. Jazz, if they don't get an extension, which personally I don't think they do, they've got 3 more years of Jazz through arbitration. Like, that's a lot of control and a young guy with emotions that you want to try and keep happy.
Agreed.
A couple £100,000 difference. Like, meet in the middle, meet 60-40, his side. I don't really care. Let's get that deal done and keep a young, hopeful star player happy. Because Jazz, if he's 2020 and healthy, or whatever he's going to do next year as a centre fielder for what he wants, 2.9, that's incredible value. Let's just get that deal done. Saving $100,000 this year to save 200 next year to save 400 the year after. Let's for $500,000. Let's keep a star player happy. It's just a no-brainer in my book.
Sean, I've got nothing more to say. You summarized it perfectly. Get it done. Percentage that the arbitration hearing actually happens with Jazz. Final question, and we'll get out of here.
I'm going to still go 40-60. They don't get a deal done and they go to arbitration. So 60% they go to arbitration. Okay. Just because it's the Marlins. And whenever I take the negative side of the coin with the Marlins, they don't awfully back me up and support me with that by what they end up doing. So let's go with that.
Yeah, seems fair. All right, I must say, Sean, I think you summarized that situation with Jazz absolutely perfectly. I'm going to snip that and put it out there on Twitter in general for people to enjoy in their own time. Guys, thanks for joining us on Locked On Marlins, and thanks to the UK GOAT, Sean Barrett, for hopping on his first one of 2024, and there will be many, many more, I am sure of that. Thanks for making Locked On Marlins your first listen. It's an early one on a Friday. We are out here hammering it early. The big news, 8 of 11 done. 3 big names still to be done. There's still some time to negotiate. Will they get any deals done, or will they end up in the arbitration room, specifically the hearings with Tanner Scott, Jase Chisholm Jr., and Luis Arraez? Time will tell, and we'll talk about it real soon on Locked On Marlins. See you then.